So today's speaker, I'd like to introduce him. Before becoming the village manager of Arlington Heights, he was in Clarendon Hills. He's got a bachelor's in political science from Northern Illinois and a master's in public administration. He's been the village manager of Arlington Heights for the last 10 years, does a terrific job. Please welcome Randall Recluse.
I'm very impressed he did that without notes. I had, when they asked me for my bio, I had to think about it really hard, so that's very good. Well, let's have a round of applause for the staff here at Luther Village. I mean, I had a tour right before I started, and I was very impressed, and I want to talk to people on the garden committee. There's some work you could do over at my house as well. But before I get started, a couple of quick things. Can I get a show of hands? How many people in this room lived in Arlington Heights before they moved here? Oh, wow. Very, very, okay. This is good. And I'm trying to get a gauge an interest. And how many people lived in the northwest suburbs generally? Wow, okay, so that's great. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm hoping I can give you some good information today, answer your questions, and so on and so forth. I'm going to be talking generally some basic information about what's going on in the village right now, talk about some projects we're working on, and then hopefully answer a lot of questions that you guys may have about things that are going on. The first thing that I always like to do, because not everyone knows what a village manager is. If you can hit the next slide. People, you watch the news and you look at the city of Chicago or the city of Illinois or the U.S. government, and where you have an elected chief executive, and then you've got, a city council or Congress or state legislature on the legislative side, and they kind of provide checks and balances with one another. We have the council manager form of government, which also provides checks and balances, but it's a little bit different. So your mayor and village board, they're all part-time. Even the mayor, a lot of people don't know that. They're regular residents that have, full-time jobs doing something else. Our mayor happens to be an attorney that pay their mortgages, and they're essentially volunteering their time. So they're not full-time politicians. They're regular folks. They hire the village manager, and I'm actually the only employee of the mayor and village board. I work for them, and then all your department heads, your police chief, fire chief, public works director, et cetera, they work directly for me. And so I can be removed at any time by the village board. And my job is to make sure that whatever the village board's goals are carried out by the staff, and also to make sure the staff have the resources they need to carry out those goals. And so I'm not a political person with an agenda. I'm hired based on my experience. And so if there's a big change on the village board because of an election or whatever, that's okay. That doesn't, our job is to figure out how to do what that village board wants to do. And as long as what they're asking me to do is, legal and ethical and moral, and my job is to figure out how to do that the best way possible. And there's lots of times where we have course corrections. We'll be doing something one way, folks get on the village board, have new ideas, and we try it another way. And even if it's not something that I recommend, I try to make sure that the village board makes decisions based on the best information possible. But at the end of the day, I've got to carry out what they do. And so that's kind of our model. And it provides a lot more stability than a system where every time you get a new mayor, you fire all the staff and start from scratch. So that's something that's a little bit different from what we do, from what you may read in other places. If you can go to the next slide. So this is the mayor and village board. On the top left is Mayor Tom Hayes, and the other 8 individuals are our current village board members. They're elected, they all have 4-year terms, but they're all elected. There's an election every other year, so they have staggered terms. Mayor Hayes, you may have read, is not running for re-election, so if anyone wants to be mayor of Arlington Heights, now's your chance. And half the board is up for re-election every 4 years as well. And so we have a good mix of folks that are from different parts of town, different walks of life, different political persuasions, and so we're happy to work with all of them. After every election, the board gets together to develop what we call our strategic priorities for the next 2 years. And so we have a kind of a retreat where they get together and talk about things in the abstract. We look at results of our community survey, things people have been hearing, and you can go to the next slide. And these are our strategic priorities. You probably can't read them very well for the next couple of years. And so we're dealing with, obviously, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but the working with Chicago Bears Football Club on the potential redevelopment of the racetrack site, maintaining good fiscal stewardship of our resources, pursuing environmentally sustainable programs, continuing efforts to maintain high-quality core municipal services, enhancing public safety, continue to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, maintaining a focus on the long-term construction and maintenance of the village's infrastructure, seeking economic development initiatives to strengthen the local economy, and the last is seeking, maintaining, expanding attainable housing within the community. Those are their main focuses that the board set for staff. So then we put together what we call the business plan, and the business plan is a list of actual measurable objectives over the next 2 years, projects that we are going to get done that have deadlines and so forth. And that's really what drives the budget process. And that's kind of how we do business in a broad sense. If you want to go to the next slide. So what are some of the things that we do? I mean, I always say that the village, if we're doing our job well, people don't notice. And so some of the things that people may not realize that we do, that we have a forestry unit within our public works department. We actually maintain 36,000 parkway trees within the community. We have 372 miles of sewers that we maintain underground. We have 263 miles of water mains within the community that we maintain, 240 miles of roads, so we have to maintain them, plow them, clean them, all of that, 383 miles of sidewalks. Arlington Heights residents use about 7.2 million gallons of water a day, so you guys are very thirsty. The community produces about 13 million pounds of garbage a year, 13 million pounds of recycling, 37 million pounds of garbage, 6 million pounds of compost. The police department responds to about 21,000 calls for service a year, fire department 11,000 calls for service. We have a social services department that provides counseling services and help the folks in need. They provided $117,000 in financial assistance to individuals in need last year and helped 420 individuals who were suffering from mental illness. We had 82,000 visits to our senior center. So it's a very popular place. We have about 500 visitors a day, something we're very proud of as well. And last year at Arlington Al Fresco in downtown Arlington Heights, we can get this from cell phone data, we had 228,000 visitors to Arlington Al Fresco last year. And so I'm very proud to say we do that with 435 employees. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The village is never closed. And we've been doing it since 1887. So we're a lot of tradition, a lot of pride in what we do with our group of folks that we have. I want to go to the next slide. Couple of things that we always like to brag on. Arlington Heights was rated the best place to live for a 10th consecutive year in the Daily Herald readership poll that they did in the best downtown atmosphere. The Insurance Services Organization rates all of the 30,000 fire departments in the United States. And they look at everything from the number of firefighters you have, your response times, what kind of fire trucks you have, even down to what your water pressure is, believe it or not. And we got the highest possible rating in ISO Class 1. It is only the top 1/3 of 1% of fire departments in the United States that get an ISO Class 1 rating. So our fire department is very elite, very proud of what they do. On the police side, their organization that rates things is CALEA, and they also receive the highest standard of police certification. Only 4% of police departments out of 18,000 in the United States has that rating, so we're very proud of that. And then our Building and Life Safety Department is the first department in the state, just a couple of months ago, to be awarded an International Accreditation Service certification. So we try very hard to do well. We like to be, we are competitive with our neighbors. Our attitude is if we see Naperville or Schaumburg or someone doing something, our attitude is let's try to do that. We can do a little bit better. And so it's friendly competition, but at the end of the day, we all help each other, but we just like to help a little bit better. Next slide. So we've started doing a survey every 2 years. This is one of the things that we do is the run up to our strategic priorities discussion. And 9 in 10 residents rated our community as excellent or good, in terms of the quality of life in Arlington Heights. Arlington Heights is a place to live, and Arlington Heights is a place to raise children. So we're very proud of that. If you go on our website, vah.com, you can get a really deep dive into our survey results. I won't do that now because we're trying to cover a lot of territory, but it's a good read if you're interested in that type of thing. Next slide. One thing that we rated really high with was library services. And the library is not actually part of the village, but they're obviously a strong community partner. And 98% of our residents rated the library service excellent or good. And this was tied for first among 338 communities that take that survey. So again, something we're very proud of within our community. Next slide. A little bit of demographic information. People may not be aware of certain facts about Arlington Heights. Our population now is just under 78,000, which makes us the 15th biggest city in Illinois. 20% of the community is actually foreign-born. People may not realize that. The owner-occupied housing rate is about 72%. Persons in poverty is 5.7%, which is far below state and national averages. And 28% of the community speak a language other than English at home. We have, the employers in Arlington Heights have 37,000 private sector jobs. And so of the Chicago suburbs, only Naperville and Schaumburg have more private sector jobs than we have. And so it's something we try to have a very diverse economy, takes pressure off of taxes, and also make sure that there's a lot of services in the area. And it keeps real estate values high, because if there's a lot of people working here, there's going to be a lot of people that want to live here as well. You can hit the next slide. In terms of our budget, the village's budget a total budget is about $230 million. That's includes a lot of funds, such as, funds for things like our water utility or our sewer funds or capital improvement funds. The budget that most people kind of focus on is what we call our general fund, and that's the fund that we run the village government off of. And a lot of people don't realize we try very hard to keep pressure off of property taxes. Our property taxes are only 28.9% of our general fund budget. Income tax, we get a share of, we don't have our own income tax, but the state gives us a certain share of income tax on a per capita basis. And so that's about 13% of our budget. Sales taxes are the biggest one, 29.7%. Fees and fines, 7.7%. Licenses and permits, 2.9%, and just other 17%. You can go to the next slide. So where does the money go? As you can see, about just under 2/3 of the general fund budget goes to the police and fire department. And then another 20% goes to public works, so working on our infrastructure. And so that's why I always call those the big three departments: fire, police, and public works, because they're the ones going out there and doing things in the physical world. And not to say the other departments aren't important, but that's really the meat and potatoes of what we do, and we always try to focus on those departments because we feel they're the ones that people see and notice the most. Next slide. One thing for folks that pay property taxes, one thing that people don't always know is the village only gets about 12% of the property tax bill that you pay. The lion's share of it goes to the schools. And so for a home that's worth about $350,000, the village only gets about $1,200 or $1,300 of your property tax bill. And so I always say that there's a decent chance folks are paying more to their cable provider than they are to the village on their property tax bill. And I always say that's a pretty good value. The TV's good, but we do a lot of good things too. One thing, and this is hard to read, I apologize. One thing we always look at every year is we take all of the different fees and taxes that we charge, and we compare that to all the different fees and taxes that our neighbors charge. And so we look at this every year as part of the budget process. And so we looked at Rolling Meadows, Hoffman Estates, Mount Prospect, Wheeling, Elk Grove, Buffalo Grove, Des Plaines, Schaumburg, Palatine, and Park Ridge. And it has like different types of sales tax, electric utility tax, property tax, of course, stormwater fees. And we look at, okay, if a resident was using the same amount of water, living the same number of vehicles, all that kind of stuff, what would they pay? And so we're right in the middle. Out of the 11 towns, we're at number 6, and we try to make sure that we maintain a good value for the services that we provide. And so this is something we always look at every year to make sure that that value proposition is still there for what we give. Next slide. So obviously a big part of what we do is public safety. And so we will talk a little bit about that. If you can go to the next slide. These are the total number of crimes committed in Arlington Heights. And as you can see, we're at or near historic lows right now with the crime data that we have. The FBI finalizes the crime data at about the third quarter of every year, so we don't have the final numbers for 2023. So you can see there was generally a downward turn until 2022. And I'm told about half of the increase in 2022, believe it or not, is catalytic converter thefts. And I know from talking to Rick, this is something that you guys are experiencing. And so there was a rash of these over the last couple of years. The good news is it's starting to get a little better, because what's happening is folks, the minerals, the metals inside of these catalytic converters were worth a lot of money, and they were very easy to cut off. People would steal them, and they could sell them. The state of Illinois is making it more difficult for folks to sell them. And so they've put it on a list of what they call high value parts. So if you're a second market auto parts dealer now, you have to register every catalytic converter that you receive. And so that's cutting down on the number of ones that they get from kind of ill-gotten methods. So that should help. But there's still a lot of money in these things, and so we just recommend people be vigilant. One thing I'll tell you is we really encourage people to call 911 if you have any kind of problem. I know some people will say, well, it's not a big emergency, I don't want to bother 911. We really encourage you to. We have enough dispatchers, they're not overrun. What we would rather, the dispatchers these days, it's pretty high tech, and so they literally know where all the police officers are in town or ambulances. And so they can figure out who is the best person that's in a position to respond to this. And the other thing to remember is, because they have all the information, what else is going on, you may see something that seems a little bit suspicious but not dangerous. They may know that there's something else going on a block away, and that's really helpful to them to know what's going on, because it may be more serious than it appears. And so we always encourage people to call 911 if you have any doubts. If you see something, say something. It helps our folks do their job. But that's one thing I do want to stress. Next slide. So this is comparing Arlington Heights data to United States and Illinois. And so folks in Illinois generally are about twice as likely to be a victim of a crime than residents of Arlington Heights. So we're half as likely, is another way to put that, to be a victim of a crime. In Illinois, generally, you're 4 times more likely than an Arlington Heights resident to be a victim of a violent crime, and you're 1.6 more times likely to be a victim of a property crime in Illinois than you are in Arlington Heights. So those are pretty strong numbers. We pride ourselves to be a safe community, and the numbers are even more pronounced in the United States in some of those areas. And so you can see that up there, that we're in pretty good shape relative to the rest of the community. Next slide. So one other thing that we look at is traffic crashes. And traffic crashes have actually reduced in Arlington Heights about 26% from 2016 to 2023. And we're very proud of that. You can see kind of the general downward trend. And then in 2020, they went down, obviously, because no one was driving because of COVID. And then they went back up, but they're still, we had last year, we had 1,823 crashes. And back in 2019, we had 1,970. And then it went up and up from there. And so we're very proud of that number. Our police department has won a couple times in the last 5 years the #1 traffic safety program in the state of Illinois. And they look at a variety of criteria. And the one thing our police department does is they use a lot of data. And so when they're doing traffic stops, when they're doing enforcement, what we do is we look at the intersections that have the most accidents, but we don't stop there. We look at what were the causes of those accidents. And so if we have an area where there's a lot of speeding, we do speeding enforcement. If there's an area where accidents were caused by speeding, that's where we do the speeding enforcement. If there's an area where accidents are being caused by distracted driving, We do cell phone enforcement there. And so we look very much at this cause and effect process. And since we've done that, the crash numbers have really dropped considerably. And so we're very happy about that. That runs counter to some of the state trends as well. And in the state, crashes have been level or going up depending on the year. So, I mean, that's something we look at. The one thing that I always like to point out to folks is the village really doesn't get a lot of money from a speeding ticket. People think those speeding tickets are expensive. I'm not saying they aren't, but the Cook County will take almost all of that money. And so the amount of money that the village gets from a typical speeding ticket, it's about $5. Yeah. If you take into consideration, we have to have a police officer there, getting paid overtime to go to court, we're losing money on it. So we really aren't doing it to make money for the town. We're doing it to make the town safer. That's the goal. Because if it was a money maker, we would be doing a bad job because it's not something that generates, a net amount of money for us. Next slide. This is on the fire side, our fire calls. And so as you're seeing, generally we're seeing our crime rates are near an all-time low. We've got the exact opposite story going on the fire side. And so you can see, again, there was a big dip in 2020 because, people weren't going anywhere. But generally speaking, our fire calls have gone up 15% over the last 10 years. And so that's continuing to rise. And what we're seeing is the vast, vast majority of those, about 78%, are EMS calls. And so really, our fire department is kind of a misnomer. Instead of it being a fire department that occasionally goes on an EMS call, we're really an EMS department that occasionally puts out a fire. Emergency medical services, yeah. And so we are in the process right now. We have 4 ambulances that are in service. When staffing allows and during certain peak area times, we actually will staff a 5th ambulance right now. We use one of our reserve ambulances and put that on frontline service during the busier times of the day. So we're discussing right now, there's going to be a time soon where we're going to want to put a 5th ambulance in service 24/7. And that's the next kind of frontier for us on the fire side. And so we're looking at how we can fund and time that, because as you can see, the need is really getting there now. Next slide. One thing I could go on and on about, I won't, is if you go online, you can go to vah.com/construction, and you can pull up a map that has all of the things that are getting worked on in town right now, construction-wise. And just as about 10 miles of roads are being resurfaced or reconstructed this year, and about 2 miles of water mains are being replaced. And so there's a lot of projects being done, but that's something that's a good resource to kind of see what's being worked on and why. Next slide. So I was going to talk to you about a few projects that we have going on right now that you may be aware of. And so one project we're very excited about is there was a developer named Bradford Allen that has bought up all the property along I-90, basically from the old Daily Herald building to Arlington Heights Road. And they want to put in mixed-use development. They've already been approved for their first phase, which is a picture of there, which has 300 multifamily luxury apartments and about 25,000 square feet of commercial, restaurant space. And so we're very excited about that. This is just the beginning, and they're making a pretty significant investment in our community there. And so that's one we're excited about. We think that our southern corridor needs some work, and we think that this is a good project to kind of kick things off and see some successful redevelopment down there. Another project that's happening is you can go back to the last slide. On the bottom there is 116 to 120 West Eastman. This is right by the library in downtown, kind of off of Eastman by the old AT&T office buildings there. They have 136 residential units and commercial on the first floor. So that's going to be kind of an addition to the north side of our downtown, but we think it's a nice looking building. And again, they took a lot of input from residents on kind of trying to make that building fit in the neighborhood. So, but it's good to see, again, some more investment in our downtown. Next slide. This one up here is one that has been talked about for a number of years. It's a project we call Arlington 425. And so if you're in downtown Arlington Heights and you're at the Metropolis Theater, there's that big empty lot to the west, right on the corner of Chestnut and Campbell. That's what this is. There's an individual developer that's owned that for a number of years, and he has had a couple of plans to redevelop that site, 319 residential units, a fairly large parking deck, and 7,500 square feet of commercial. This went through a couple of iterations. It was approved by the village. Then the gentleman decided not to go forward with it. He came in with another plan. It was approved. He didn't move forward with it, but now he's actually got approved, and he's in for building permits now. And usually when people get building permits, they're pretty serious. So we're excited. This is really the last undeveloped piece of property, majorly underdeveloped piece of property in our downtown. And so we're excited about that. Again, it's a nice vote of confidence in our downtown that people are willing to spend that kind of money to invest and kind of strengthen the downtown. The next building down there, this is Hickory Kensington. There's actually two buildings. There's 5 North Douglas and 5 North Hickory. This is a piece of property kind of near Rec Park by the lumber yard there near Mariano's. And so these are apartments that are going in there. That area is kind of in the middle of redevelopment. Some of that smaller industrial space is likely to turn over and to turn into other types of commercial. And so it'll probably be a little bit of a neighborhood down there is what we're seeing happen. And so, because you've got a grocery store that you can walk to, you've got these apartments, and there'll probably be some restaurants and so forth. Probably not to the same scale that we have in our downtown, but similar, where it's kind of a mixed-use area anchored by Rec Park. International Plaza, right on Golf and Arlington Heights Road. This is not the garden spot of Arlington Heights. If you go to the next slide, it's an old shopping center that has been in a level of disrepair for many, many years. We had some very difficult times with the ownership there, and I'm very happy to report that the property is under contract. The owner has is almost done knocking the project down, which in and of itself is a win because it was such an eyesore. And the current proposal is 7 residential buildings. 1 building would be senior affordable housing, and then there'd be 6 acres of commercial as well. So we're currently negotiating a redevelopment agreement with the person who has the property, the developer that has the property under contract. We're very hopeful that this will go through. But if it doesn't, at least the buildings are down now, and we can, it's more of a clean slate for development. But that one is one we've been working on very hard for a long time. Next slide. You guys might have heard of this project. Before we get into this, I will, this is obviously a very interesting, exciting project, but one of the unique things about this project is it's basically been reported on in the, sports radio, sports news world. And the truth is, it's a very complex, impactful real estate project, first and foremost. And that's how we're looking at it. It's very easy to get caught up in the kind of the soap opera of what's being played out in the media, or in terms of just the excitement of, having the idea that the Bears might come to Arlington Heights. But we're trying to keep a clear head about it. The truth is, we only have one chance to get this thing right, whether it's the Bears or someone else. And so we try to look at these things as analytically and as thoughtfully as we can, as exciting as it is. So what I was going to do is give you a little bit, because so much of this has been covered in the sports media. I don't know how accurate all of that is. I was going to give you a little bit of the history of this discussion that we've had with this site, and then also talk about kind of where things stand currently. So if you want to go to the next slide. The first thing I always like to point out is it is a very big piece of property. People don't realize how big of a piece of property it is. People will look at the grandstand. Actually, you can go back to the last slide just for a second. So you can see the grandstand here. And then if you zoom back out, the property goes all the way to the highway there. And so, that grandstand was pretty darn big in and of itself. But so if you go to the next slide, that's actually a really good drawing of the property. I'm impressed. If you go to the next slide, what we did is we superimposed the size of the property onto downtown Arlington Heights. And so you can see in the middle there, that's downtown. On the far right, you're at Mariano's over there. On the south, you can go all the way down to South Middle School. And then on the far west side, you're as far west, you're further west than like Pioneer Park. And so if you superimpose it, it'd be that big. Another point of reference was how many of you guys are familiar with Epcot, in Florida? It's the same size as Epcot. It's about 2.5 Vatican cities. I mean, it is. We can keep going on and on, but it's a really big piece of property. And so even if you put a stadium on there, there's still a lot of other stuff that will have to go there as well. A typical 326 acres, a typical NFL stadium with parking is about 120, 130. So it's that big. So if you can go to the next slide. So how did this story unfold? The village obviously has had a close relationship with the track, both when Mr. Duchossois owned it and when Churchill Downs owned it. And, we've been knowing for years that the track just wasn't doing well, that they were having financial difficulties. Horse racing in general in Illinois has kind of fallen on hard times. And even with the state had passed they call it the Racino bill, where you can have a casino on the racetrack. It was generally seen in the industry as a little, kind of too little, too late, because of the way that they set up the taxing structures. I mean, I'll point out they passed that bill, I think in like 2018 or something like that. We still don't have a Racino built anywhere in Illinois. And so it was kind of a matter of time before Churchill Downs wanted to divest themselves of it. They didn't want it to be a racetrack because they didn't want it to compete. And so they wanted to sell it to someone who wasn't going to have it as a racetrack. I guess they had a bad experience in California where they sold one of their flagship properties and then someone took it and ran it to the ground, and Churchill Downs kind of like people thought they still owned it. And so they wanted to avoid that. So back in November of 2020, we had a meeting with them and they said they were exploring the sale of the track. February of 2021, they announced they were putting the property up for sale. We quickly said, well, hold on a second, this is going to be a pretty big change for us. And so the village we created what's called a zoning overlay district. And so it's a set of rules for development of that property that is different from the rest of the town because we really wanted to protect the asset. We had a whole list of uses that you can't do there. You can't just put anything there. We also, the biggest thing was, we want the site to be master planned. We didn't want to get chopped up into a million pieces, so 20 years from now, you never knew that there was anything special there. And we're looking for something that's going to be kind of a unique, one-of-a-kind destination type use that's, befitting of the property's legacy is kind of what our goal is and was. So in August of 2021, the mayor and I were asked to go to a meeting with the Churchill Downs. Said this were the people that are potentially one of the finalists, and we didn't know who they were. And so we met them in an office in downtown Chicago, and we walked in the door, and it was George McCaskey and Ted Phillips from the Bears. And that's literally how we found out, was just seeing them face to face. And so we began, then in September, they announced that they were, of 2021, they announced that they got their property under contract. And you can go to the next slide. And so through that next year, we had a lot of meetings with Bears representatives, talking about what they were contemplating doing, what our goals were, what types of things we would consider, in understanding that they still hadn't bought the property yet, just getting to know each other and our thought processes. So in fall of 22, that's when they unveiled their concept. It was just a concept. This was not something that was approved by the village. It was just kind of a starting off point for conversations. And so, even if something happens there, we don't know what will end up looking like, but that was a starting off point. The other thing we did is we wanted to develop a roadmap of what a discussion about the development of the property would look like. What kind of studies would we do? Who would pay for what, just in terms of the process, not the actual construction itself, to kind of give them an idea of how we thought. And so if you go to the next slide, in November of 23, we passed what we call a pre-development agreement. And this was before the Bears bought the property. And it was a statement of mutual cooperation. And there were a couple of key points. It's a longer document, but I want to highlight these things because they contrast with what you've probably read in the newspaper about their Chicago concept that they're exploring. So the first thing was, we made it very clear to them, the village isn't interested in owning a football stadium. Where a lot of the towns, when you read about and do research, that get stuck with these things when a team leaves town. We had no interest in that. We didn't want to maintain a stadium. And they agreed, and they said, if we move forward, the Bears do not intend to ask the village for any financial assistance for the construction of a stadium. And that was important to us, and that was in the agreement that they signed. They did acknowledge that they do intend to request assistance for some of the infrastructure costs. But we said we would only agree to pay for those in the same way we do any other project. And so, as I mentioned, the village is in the infrastructure build business. We build roads, we build water mains, sewers, et cetera. And so there are a lot of projects in town where we contribute to the infrastructure costs. That's kind of part of our business model. So that wasn't a big ask. We didn't agree that we would pay for it. We just said we understood that you'd be asking and we'd have to talk about that. But we'd only consider that in the same way that we consider any other project. The other couple of the big things we were concerned about is what is the impact of this going to be on the local economy? How much revenue could it generate? And then what's the impact going to be on traffic? And so the Bears agreed to hire traffic consultants to do pretty robust studies on those topics. Those were a couple of the big things that we wanted. If you want to go to the next slide. In terms of how we would consider to do infrastructure work, what we said is we would only consider, number one, project-generated revenues. And so we're not taking property tax revenue or existing revenue in town. We're saying, okay, there's going to be a lot of new revenue that comes from this site, because pretty much anything you're going to put there is going to generate more revenue for the village than essentially a dying racetrack was. And so, we're saying we could take some of that new revenue and pay for some of the infrastructure expenses that might need to occur as part of this. But one of our goals is, and one of the things we said we had to get was, it has to be determined that the project will still generate net new revenue for the village. So after all the expenses that we may have, and we are probably going to have to hire new police officers and firefighters and all of that to service the site, after all of that, we still have to come out ahead financially. And only then would we consider, doing something like this. So if you want to go to the next slide. So Bears purchased the property in February, and then they began to run into some tax challenges with our site. And I'm going to show you some numbers in a minute, but the property was assessed by Cook County Assessor's Office significantly higher than when it was a racetrack. And one thing to point out is in Cook County, commercial property is assessed differently than residential property. Residential property is assessed essentially based on what your property is worth. Commercial property, it's based more on the amount of revenue your property can generate. And so it's actually against the rules in Illinois to do what's called sales chasing for commercial property, where someone buys a property, pays X amount, and then you set the taxes for that amount. That's not how it's done. But it appears to be what happened in this situation. So they were in the midst of this tax fight. They took down the facility, which was their right, to save on property taxes. And they also began to do their due diligence to look at other locations. The traffic and financial studies that they said they were going to do, they put them on hold pending the resolution of these tax issues that had developed. The village engaged with all the parties, the county, the school districts, because the school districts, again, they get so much of your property tax bill. They have a vested interest in this, to try to help resolve these things. And we wanted to, come up with a fair taxation concept and protect the school districts from extraordinary costs that might result from the project. And so we had been working on a draft memorandum of understanding, or MOU, to resolve these issues. I want to go to the next slide. So pointing out the property tax issue, why this was a challenge. So when the racetrack was open and there was horses racing and people were buying drinks and betting and all that, the track was paying about $3 million a year in property taxes. So the Bears buy the property. It's an unlicensed racetrack that has no way to make money, and they get hit with a $16 million property tax bill. So as a point of reference, so what they're thinking is, man, if we're going to pay $16 million as a vacant track, what the heck is it going to be after we build a $3 billion football stadium? And so as a point of reference, so they went through a process and they got it down to 8.9 million. And but that's still the highest property tax paying stadium in the United States is SoFi Stadium in California, where the Rams and the Chargers play. They pay 8.8 million. Wrigley Field, again, they have baseball games and concerts and all that, 2.7 million. United Center pays 6.1 million. And so you could see why there's somewhat of a debate over what the taxes should be. The other one that I always point out is the vacant Sears campus down the road in Hoffman Estates, which is about the same size as just under 300 acres, except that till recently had about 1 million or almost 2 million square feet of usable office space. They were paying about 4.5 million in taxes. And so there was real cause for concern, debate on this issue. And we understand why the Bears were concerned, and we've been working to resolve that. So then in March, the Bears indicated they were shifting their focus to a lakefront site within the city of Chicago. They sought legislative support for that concept in Springfield, and the legislative session ended in May with no legislation. And so now, where things are, we are still in discussions with the Bears about their site. Those continue, and I don't want to negotiate in public, but I'll just say that those conversations are continuing and progress is being made. The village believes strongly that our site is more valuable in the long run. When you see what other towns are doing, or other teams are doing, they're making a real estate play around the development where they can kind of have their Chicago Bears land around it with hotels and restaurants and all of that. Anyone who's been to a Bears game at Soldier Field, it's pretty difficult to get to, and there's not really a lot else to do around there. And so we think long term this is more profitable, but at the end of the day, it has to be a good deal for Arlington Heights. And we are not chasing the Bears for the sake of getting the Bears. We think that there's some real opportunities there that could be mutually beneficial, but in the end, we see that it can't work for them or for us. Then that's fine, because there'll be other uses that'll come around. But that's kind of where things stand with the Bears. Wrapping up a couple. So if you want to, you can go there. If you want to keep up with what's going on, vh.com/Arlington Park, you can kind of get the latest information. If you guys use QR code, you can scan that code. It'll take you right there too. I'll leave that up there for a minute. But so that's been a big kind of expenditure of our time, but it is important, and it's something that will be impactful for many, many years in terms of what this community is going to look like. Now, if you can go to the next slide. So we are in event season in Arlington Heights. Arlington Al Fresco is underway. Sounds of Summer concerts started a couple weeks ago. Obviously, Frontier Days is starting here tomorrow, so we're excited about that. And then we've got a few more coming up. You can learn more about our events at takeittothe.heights.com. Next slide. If you want to kind of find out what's going on, obviously you can go to our website. For those of you that use social media, you can find out there, or you can sign up to the Village's e-news, where you'll get regular email blasts from the Village to you about things that are going on. But with that, if I go to the next slide, happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
My name is Jean Wood. I'm a resident here and also a member of First United Methodist Church in Arlington Heights. I'm on their Faith and Justice Committee, and our church and a consortium of churches are working very diligently to try to ensure that grace, what am I trying to say? The Grace Terrace, I'm sorry, the other word, the Grace Terrace comes to fruition. So I've been to all kinds of meetings. We've done petitions and letters and all of that to the village board. I understand that when it was first brought to the village board, there were great concerns, and that now that you have to have a supermajority to approve it, not just a 5 vote. It has to be 6 votes. I don't know if they're there or not, but Circle 1, is it Circle 1?
Full circle.
Full circle. See,
I know what you're saying.
This is a senior community.
No, I understand. I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you.
So Full Circle has done due diligence, and they had a meeting at the library where lots of the neighbors of the proposed It's really a development, it's for people who have developmental challenges, and there's a priority for veterans, people with disabilities. And so the NIMBYs were all there, and it was a very contentious meeting. And I hope that all of the questions are now being answered. I know that it's taken a long time for the developer to try to meet the residents' needs. They had to turn it facing Arlington Heights Road instead of facing the neighbors, and so on and so forth. My understanding is there probably will be a discussion and a vote sometime at one of the meetings, August meetings of the village board. Now, I know that the Plan Commission did not recommend it at the beginning. Does it go before the Plan Commission again after all these revisions? Does it have to have 6 votes instead of 5 votes? What is the status of that?
I'm going to give you the worst answer, and the answer is it depends. So no, you've got it all right. I mean, and so what the issue is Full Circle has changed the plan somewhat, and so we're right now, and there's going to be more information on this like this week. You're very timely. We're trying to figure out legally, is it going to require it going back to the Plan Commission? Because the other thing is the Plan Commission, when they first spoke about this, the whole Plan Commission wasn't there. And so we would hope to, if it does have to go back to the Plan Commission, we'd hope to get to a meeting where everyone is there, and then and then after that, it would go back to the village board where everyone is there. So that's what we're trying to figure out, is exactly what those steps are legally based on their proposal. And, you know, they're absolutely entitled to their due diligence, I mean, to their due process, I should say, on this. But then the flip side is the residents are able to engage in their First Amendment rights as well. And at the end of the day, the village board has to make, you know, a land use decision based on what is going to be a good fit for that site, you know, based on the conditions. From a staff perspective, what we always try to do is we will try to take the project, take the village board's comments, push the developer to make the best version of it they can based on the board's comments, and then see, does it meet the threshold of the board? Sometimes there's enough votes there, sometimes there isn't. We'll see what happens with this one. But no, it's very much a focus of the village right now. And, you know, I can't say which meetings it's going to be at, but it's going to be in the relative near future, you know, the next couple of months where you're going to see this on agendas again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. My name's Susan Adelman. I'm a resident here. And I have a comment about the bears.
Sure.
Be careful what you ask for. My brother lives in Cincinnati, okay, Bengals. He lives 11 miles from the stadium. On game days, it's backed up all the way to his house. And the other concern I have locally is I've heard some fear about if the Bears come. The stadium, I believe, is in the Palatine School District.
It depends on how they put it. There's 3 school districts on the site. There's District 211, District 15, and District 214.
Yeah. So what will happen to the funds for the schools? Wherever, I mean, basically all of them will get new property taxes depending on what the development is on that site. And so obviously there's a stadium component, but there's also other components of this. And so depending on what ends up on your site, you know, that'll go to that school district based on the boundaries. Okay. Would that take away from, I guess my family's concern is, will the tax money be taken from the schools toward them?
No, I mean, one of the things we've been working on with the MOU is figuring out a way to guarantee that the school districts still come out ahead on this. That's the goal. That's been a real focus over the last year, is working with the school districts and the Bears to make sure everyone can be winners on this.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to see this happen. But I like my Arlington Heights quiet. So.
Sure.
I
Understood.
like my little village.
Understood.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit on that woman's comments, the sheer number of units that are for all of these projects that you mentioned, I have no idea how many might include families with children. But the Arlington Heights, and I'm familiar with District 25,
Yes.
already is overpacked with students. It's reaching its maximum. And whatever is done then with the schools, I'm not sure that property taxes would be enough to go ahead and cover what's needed. For instance, Arlington Heights just is getting through, what, 90 million, $70 million of
Correct.
tremendous amount of money for just a little bit of extra space. So that's just a concern that, from a school district standpoint.
It's a fair concern. One thing I'll point out is we really are not getting many kids out of these multifamily developments. So to give you an idea, in downtown Arlington Heights, I think most people are familiar and you can picture, we have, there's about 1,200 housing units in downtown Arlington Heights. We have 46 school children come out of downtown Arlington Heights. And 20 of them come out of one building, which is a lower income building, which you would expect to have more. So most of what we're looking at here is kind of more high end, and usually the higher end the apartment, the less kids you have generated. And so we are very cognizant of that. And generally speaking, apartments are, from a school perspective, are generating more property taxes than they're draining. But it is a tricky thing, and it is something that we have to be mindful of 100%. And it is something we talk about with them. The other thing is these projects do have to pay impact fees to the schools, kind of based somewhat on the number of kids generated. And so there is a mechanism to make sure the schools are whole. But we don't see, this would be very different if someone was proposing, 4-bedroom, single-family homes. That would be a very different story, because then that would generate a lot of children.
If I might ask one more question,
Sure.
is there roughly a drop-dead date for the Bears to make a decision?
No.
I mean, their contract with the city of Chicago comes up, et cetera.
Their contract with the city, they lease from the Chicago Park District at Soldier Field, and I believe their lease is up in 2033. And so there's some time. I think they may have internal deadlines that we're not aware of. But from our perspective, certainly we'd like to see something happen there. Again, could be a stadium, could be something else. But we're more concerned about making sure it's done right than kind of adhering to an artificial deadline.
Hi, Randy. I'm over here.
Oh, hey.
Hi, Randy. I'm a resident here at Arlington Building. And I guess my question is, George Hellis, when he was in charge of the Bears, he put the team together on a shoestring. And, we can't help what the economy, what it's doing today. But I wouldn't turn your back on them. I think the Bears are a good deal. Not only will the Bears generate money, but you got entertainment that can go there. And you'll generate a lot of money here for Arlington Heights. But the thing is, you got to get people working together. You got to get fast transportation. You have to have good parking, not only at the track, but elsewhere. You have to have a vision of what it's going to be like. Maybe a closed stadium so the noise won't get all over the village. It takes foresight to make something worthwhile. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think that, right now, ultimately, it's the Bears' decision to move forward or not. It's their property, their stadium, their money. And they put forth their initial vision. We said, all right, we're willing to talk about that. We need to see what the traffic's going to look like, what the money's going to look like, and then let's get going. And they agreed to that. And we've got hung up on this tax issue, which I believe is imminently solvable if we want it to be. And then we can be off to the races. But I agree with you. When we visited a few stadiums and other places in the country, the towns that kind of host them now, we've said, what would you do differently? What worked? What didn't? How did you manage traffic? All of that. And we've been hearing from people. And one of the things that they say is that our site is really kind of a unicorn, because you've got a metro stop right there. You're right next to two large highways. You've got a lot of parking decks in Schaumburg right there that are really empty on Sundays. You've got Harper College that's got 9,000 parking spaces, and you've got a lot of parking there. And so there are a lot of ways to do it, but we have to get everyone together and get people from not working at odds with one another. And I think that we've got the right people at the table, and I think this is something that can be resolved if all the parties want it to be resolved, and that's the goal. But I agree with you very much.
I'm Judy Kristen from Dunton House. First of all, I have a compliment and then I have a question. My compliment is myself, along with many of my residents, have called 911, and we cannot thank you enough for the wonderful paramedics.
The best, the
Yes.
best.
My question, I live downtown Arlington, so I'm aware that there is a need for rental. I also have a question. These new rentals that are going in, is there a percentage of each one of the buildings that it will be low income?
So Arlington Heights, and where are you? I'm sorry, I couldn't see you back there. There you are, all the way. Okay, good. That makes me feel better. I thought you were right in front of me and I missed you. In Arlington Heights, we do have an ordinance where a percentage of every building has to be at 60% the area median income. And so the idea is, instead of having a concentration of low income, in some cases, every unit, every building has to have some. And then no one knows which units are the low income ones. You get rid of the stigma issues and everything else. But yes, all of these buildings have to have some. And usually it's between 5 and 7% of the units. So it's not a huge percentage, but it adds up. But one of the things that we're concerned about, and I think you all know this, is we're seeing housing costs go up and up and up and up. And folks that perhaps grew up here can't afford to live here. People that, kids that went off to college can't afford to come back. And the scenario we're worried about is what you saw happen in Southern California, where you've got such a huge area that doesn't have, workforce housing, forget about even affordable housing, but housing where teachers and police officers and firefighters can live, that it really impacts the recruitment of those. I mean, like, we've heard stories of some places in Orange County where they've had to put police officers on a 12 or 15-hour shift because they aren't willing to drive 2-3 hours every day to come to work. And so you think about how dangerous that is to have a police officer who's been working 13, 14 hours showing up somewhere. It's not a good recipe for success. And so we're trying to do that by talking about more affordable housing concepts. And one of those is having a percentage in all of our buildings that is somewhat affordable, at least. But it's a tough nut to crack, because you're dealing with market forces, you're dealing with property values, and you're dealing with developers that are only going to build a project if they can make a certain rate of return. So it's a tricky one.
Hi, I'm Erica Spreitzer. I live in Campbell, and I have a question about the Bears. Did the Bears put forward a plan what kind of stadium they're building?
It was very preliminary. They did say from the beginning it would be a dome stadium, and so that's something that they've been very consistent about. But in terms of the details of it, no. The only thing we had that very rough drawing, which, again, we hadn't really reviewed or approved, but there still would be many more details forthcoming. It could end up being very different than that initial plan that they proposed.
Because it really does matter for the income, what kind of stadium it is. Is it an open and closed dome? Can we hold a Super Bowl there in the future? Could we hold concerts in the summer? So the building itself, how much seating do they have? What do they feature in the building? It really depends on the building itself, what they can make money on. Thank you.
Hey, I have one quick comment. I want to jump on what Ms. Kristen said. I've been here for 6 years. I've been the executive director for about 1.5 years. We were talking about complaints on departments and things that needed to be addressed. Do you know that in 6 years we have never had a complaint on a paramedic? Not one time. You would think one of them would come in here having a bad day. They come in here sometimes 8, 10 times a day. Not a single complaint. We really should give these guys a round of applause.
I will share that with them, and I'll tell you that means the world to them. So thank you.
Mary Ann Carl, I'm in Bradley. Do the Bears own the whole piece of property?
Yes.
And
Oh.
could they sell off part of it and still keep their portion for the stadium?
Well, they could, but it would have to be developed as part of a master plan. So there'd have to, they couldn't just, we'd have to have a master plan that we approve. Now, whether they own it in the long term or they sell it to a developer that's partnered with them, that could happen for sure. But there just has to be an overall plan for the site. Their intention is, what we've talked to them, was to use a substantial portion of the site because they really want to, that's the whole idea is that whatever gets developed there is going to be worth more and make more money because of the stadium, and they want to be able to capture and make that money off of their investment. So that's their concept.
Thank you.
Gary Wanke, I live in the Villa Courtyards. I would like you to make a few more comments about traffic issues. I was thinking of, for example, ambulances that would have to get from, say, Luther Village to Northwest Community, like on a Sunday. And, Euclid even backs up quite a bit now. A lot of Euclid Avenue is only one lane in each direction. Would a lot of trees have to be, knocked down or whatever? Could you just comment on all these
Sure.
potential traffic issues?
There's a lot of it. So that's one of the reasons why we want to do traffic studies is to determine the exact solutions. But, and so I can't tell you exactly how this would work, but I can tell you a general sense of what we see in other towns that host stadiums. And there's towns that are even smaller than Arlington Heights. Foxborough, Massachusetts, where the Patriots play, they're only about, I think, 27,000 people. So they're a much smaller town. And what we find is that most stadiums will host around 20 big events a year. You've got, 8 or 9 football games. If your team is better, maybe a couple more because you're in the playoffs. Lately, we haven't had to worry about that. And then you've got a few concerts a year. And so you're about 20 events. And what we're finding, and this is in rough terms, and again, we don't know how exactly it's going to work out. Most stadiums are seeing about an hour to an hour and a half before the event, an hour to hour and a half after the event, traffic is lousy. And so what they will do is the police departments will generally, the traffic will be very controlled. They may control having police officers add up to like 50 intersections in the area. They know where the choke points are. They may say, and I'm not saying this would happen, you can't go down Euclid. They may say Euclid is closed to stadium traffic. They may say that a lot of because in things like how ambulances are going to be responding and all that is going to be a big factor in kind of how we look at that. And so there's a lot of work to be done there, but it's something that, other towns have done and they have, put thought into. And so we'd be trying to learn from them, both good and bad, and having experts look at what could happen. But a lot of work will still need to be done on that.
Yeah, this is Gary Wanke again. And, the Bears are famous for tailgating. And the thing is, this is not only like a couple hours before or after a game. This is going to be basically all day Sunday. And then if you have some rock concert on Saturday or whatever, I see changing the whole nature of Arlington Heights with just making it way too congested.
I mean, and that's one of the things that has to be considered. But I mean, I think if you look at what they say is, yes, there's tailgaters, but the traffic, what we find at football stadiums, an hour and a half before and after, and same with concerts. And so if you look at it that way, you're looking, if there's 20 events a year, you're looking at 40 to, 60 hours a year where there'd be, tough traffic. And what they say is, generally speaking, the locals all know how to avoid it. That they find their routes, and the departments plan their routes, and so they will know how to get around. They know when the games are. But I don't want to minimize it. It is an issue. It could be a reason in the end that this doesn't work. But it's been done other places, and we have some things going for us with our site that other places don't. But that doesn't mean it will be good enough. It's just, it's enough to look at, I guess is what we're saying.
Hi, Randy. I'm commenting on what I saw before, and I don't know how many people were paying attention. The secret in this whole thing is mass transportation, and you have to get other Chicago, Airport, Jefferson Park, things like that. You have to do some planning. It's not just about Arlington Heights. It's about the whole Cook County. That's how you plan ahead.
Yep, 100%. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done, and again, we're trying to learn from other places. Perhaps when you buy a Bears ticket, if it's there, your Bears ticket is a Metro ticket that day. And so you're really incentivized to use the trains. If you activated like Harper College's lot, and you take buses take up a lot less traffic than cars. One thing that we saw from one of the other stadiums, which we thought was really interesting, is so parking on the site, let's say it's, whatever, it's going to be too much, $60, $70 to park, or you can park for $10 if you don't leave for an hour and a half after the game. And so that does two things. It spreads out the traffic, and also it encourages you to go spend your money at one of the restaurants or local establishments. So there's a lot of things that will need to be explored and done and can be done. At the end of the day, whether it meets the community threshold, that's what we have to see. But I agree with you. There's a lot of creativity that can be applied to this.
That's Susan Adelman again. I did want to say, because my brother lives in a residential area, far from expressways and the main roads, and he says people have figured out ways of going through his area. So it's a big consideration.
It's a challenge,
Yeah.
sure.
I don't know if you thought about Buffalo. This is Jean Wood again. Buffalo, New York, the smallest market for the NFL. And at one point, when we first moved there, when our kids were little, there was this big discussion about whether to have it on the waterfront, where the city is, or move it way out to Orchard Park, this little town, 2-lane road. They decided on Orchard Park. Now, they're going to be, that stadium isn't big enough and not fancy enough. They're going to move it across the road. Going to build another stadium. Now, my sons just went there to a game, and he said, I tell you, the residents make a ton of money because all of their driveways and yards, they have signs up, park here for such and such. And so it's kind of a whole community shindig every Sunday out there. But the roads, going out there is terrible on this 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
We've got all these parking bays at Luther Village, Mrs.
There you
Wood.
go.
Please, I don't want any enemies. That's a dumb comment.
I've got one spot out in front. Dennis Reardon, Campbell House. You mentioned about the taxes that the Bears are going to have to pay.
Yeah.
That's going to continue until they make a final decision.
Right.
What's driving that high taxes for the Bears? Is it a ruse from the school districts just to stick it to them for a while and see what happens?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think, the Cook County Assessor's Office assessed it high. And, the schools and us are trying to work with them to get it to a fair level, but also try to make sure that, the school district's interests are protected in terms of school kids. But I wouldn't say it's a ruse. I think, everyone is negotiating in good faith to get this thing down. But the county really threw everyone a curveball with where they assessed it at. And they ultimately are in control, and that's kind of what we're facing right now. Anything else?
Here we go, right here.
I'm Ed Krupka from Bradley, 60-year resident of Arlington Heights, and I'd like to see the Bears here. But anyway, has Mr. Warren painted himself into a corner with his strong speech about being downtown now? Or has any outlet that we've figured out for him to get out gracefully of his commitment to the lakefront?
You know, I won't speculate on that. You know, what I'll say is, you know, we've been in communication with them, and, you know, they're business people. And at the end of the day, I suspect they'll make the decision that's best for their business. And, you know, this is, when you mix business and politics and sports fandom, a lot of things happen. And so, you know, how that plays out, you know, I think your guess is as good as mine. Like I said, we've been consistent in terms of, you know, advocating for continuing our conversation and looking for creative ways to solve any issues that come up. But you know, it's a fair question, but I don't have an answer.
Any other questions? Okay, let's give a round of applause to Mr. Reckless.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was great.